But first, I always like to report intelligent life in the Democratic Party whenever I come across it. And I have. Holding in my baby brown libertarian fingers an article from Politico, which is not exactly a neocon publication, headline, Pelosi moves to muzzle Trump impeachment talk. I repeat, Pelosi moves to muzzle Trump impeachment talk. We always talk about the turmoil within the Republican Party, how many Republicans are not down with Donald Trump and how Donald Trump has ticked off so many people. Do you realize there's a raging fight within the Democratic Party on what to do next? On the one hand, you have people like Keith Ellison, who wanted to be chair of the DNC, who feels you need to double down on Obamacare, need to move towards a single-payer system, double down on open borders, double down on calling Donald Trump a racist. On the other hand, you have somebody like Nancy Pelosi. When Nancy Pelosi is considered to be reasonable, you know it's time to meet your maker. I mean, my goodness. Pelosi even apparently put pressure on Al Green to back off forcing a vote on impeachment when the Texas Democrat Al Green tried to start the issue on the floor. One of the Democratic leaders, Steny Hoyer, was seen having a, quote, long, intense chat with Green just off the House floor during that debate. So these people are realizing something. You know what that's something they're realizing? The economy is getting better. This is from CNBC. Headline, U.S. private sector added 235,000 jobs in October versus 200,000 new jobs expected. First sentence, may I? Thank you. The number of private sector jobs created in October rose more than expected, with construction jobs surging in the wake of destructive hurricanes Harvey and Irma. End of quote. Remember, we were told that because of those hurricanes, we were going to have fewer jobs and the economy was going to go into a slump? Apparently it hasn't. Here's another one. This is from the Minnesota Star Tribune, where I just did a town hall in Minneapolis. Headline, manufacturing surges in Midwestern states. Oh, my goodness. Headline, manufacturing surges in Midwestern states. Say it ain't so. First sentence, citing strong exports, hiring, and faster ingredient deliveries, Midwestern manufacturers reported their highest growth in 4 months in October, according to a widely watched economic report issued Wednesday by Creighton University. Yikes. They quote a director of the Creighton Economic Forecasting Group, quote, both the national and our regional indices indicate that the manufacturing sector is expanding at a very healthy pace and that this expansion will spill over into the broader national and regional economies in the next 3 to 6 months, end of quote. This one is from the Daily Mail, headline, for many in Trump's America, a year to crow about. Williamstown, West Virginia, quote, the sleepy West Virginia town is in wood country where 70% of voters celebrated the anti-established victory of Trump. A year later, they are pledging their loyalty to the Trump revolution, praising the billionaire businessman turned national leader for already delivering on his declaration to reverse their declining fortunes. Next paragraph. In an elbow of the industrial Ohio River Basin, barges are filled with freight. Factories lining nearby Route 7 belch smoke and steam. On the highways, trucks are loaded with sections of pipeline and water tanks used in the region shale glass drilling. The town's pride is the Hino factory, Hino, a subsidiary of Toyota that employs 300 people. In September, it announced 250 more hires. The manufacturer has outgrown its facility and will soon relocate to bigger digs 20 miles south. The mayor of Williamstown, population 3,000, says, quote, we are much better off than we were before Trump became president. Close quote. Apparently, Nancy Pelosi has gotten the message and has told her party to tamp down on the nonsense about impeachment.
This is not okay.
Now, I mentioned I like to point out intelligent life on the left whenever I come across it. Here's another example. You remember Pierce Morgan? That's right, the Pierce Morgan, the anti-Second Amendment Pierce Morgan, who decided he was going to change American culture and change the Constitution of America by championing against the Second Amendment and calling it foolish. He lost his job, didn't have ratings. Americans apparently felt pretty insulted. Well, he's now written a piece where he talks about the first anniversary of Donald Trump's win in 2 weeks, and that Trump-hating liberals in places like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia are planning a day of protest in which they're going to go outside, get this, they're going to stare upwards and scream at the sky in rage. I am not joking. The event is planned on Facebook. It's called, quote, Scream Helplessly at the Sky on the anniversary of the election. The organizer, named Joanna Schulman, told Newsweek, quote, this administration has attacked everything about what it means to be an American. Who wouldn't feel helpless every day, close quote. So they're having a scream out to complain about the Donald Trump presidency. And Pierce Morgan has written a piece naming 10 reasons why he feels Donald Trump is going to get reelected. Honestly, I can't believe it. Point number one, he's the most resilient, uncompromising man in America. Love him or hate him, Trump hasn't changed or pivoted one iota from the candidate who ran for office. Yes, Trump's an inveterate BSer, the byproduct of life as a shameless salesman, but to date, he hasn't lied to us into an illegal war like one of his most recent critics, George W. Bush, did in Iraq. Now, I'm going to go over some of the other reasons he's given, and I will tell you that, of course, George W. Bush didn't lie. That is a common refrain on the part of people like Pierce Morgan. So he's not completely purged himself of his more base instincts. Number two, Trump's enemies are bailing out from the fight like a conscientious objector in a war. Yesterday, two senators, Bob Corker and Jeff Flake, made grandiose media-grabbing attacks on the president, but he says they're only doing it because they're leaving. Meanwhile, the other people are standing by President Trump. Number three, Hollywood's liberal elite. Because of the Harvey Weinstein and other revelations, they've exposed themselves, quote, to be a bunch of shocking hypocrites whose high moral and ethical plane now lies in a pile of ruins. Number four, the Dems don't have anybody yet they can run against who can actually beat him. Number five, Hillary's still hanging around like a bad smell to remind everybody on a daily basis of why the world's biggest and most shocking political defeat occurred. Number six, Trump's doing very well with the crucial election deciding issue, the economy. Remember when Paul Krugman, the left-wing economist, the one who's changed his views depending upon if a Democrat's in office or if Republicans in office. When the Democrats in office, deficit spending is okay. When Republicans in office, oh my goodness, they're spending too much. Paul Krugman predicted on election night that the markets would tank. They didn't. Number seven, his base is solid. Polls suggest everybody who voted for Trump would do it again. Not so with Hillary. Number eight, on the foreign stage, he's far from being a disaster. He slapped around Syria dictator Bashar al-Assad. He's got ISIS on the run. He stood up to Kim Jong-un. Number nine, his Twitter feed continues to dominate the news agenda. And number 10, he's an incumbent, and historically 70% of those who run again get reelected. So the stats are on his side. Oh, my goodness. I guess he's not going to be impeached and kicked out of office. At least not just yet. In some parts, especially where he talked about drawing inward and nativism, and he attacked protectionism. And as you know, I'm not in favor of protectionism. I've written critically of Donald Trump's position on that, and I still believe that he's wrong about that. And I've talked to Stephen Moore, his top economic advisor, and Stephen Moore even believes that Boss is wrong about that. But let me tell you what George W. Bush is upset about. Do you remember during the campaign when Trump said that he did not support the war in Iraq, although it appeared that he sort of did, and kind of gave a lukewarm answer in that interview with Howard Stern that has been dissected over and over and over again? During the campaign, not only did he say he opposed the war and felt that it was a war, that we don't win wars and that sort of thing, but he said George W. Bush lied us into it. He only said it one time, but he did say it. And I would imagine George W. Bush was crawling the freaking wall to hear a fellow Republican say that of him. This is the kind of crap the left says. Bush lied, people died. It's the kind of crap that Ted Kennedy said. Week after week after week, we were told lie after lie after lie. This is the kind of crap that Frank Rich of the New York Times said in his book, where he claims that it was just sold, a pack of lies. And I told you yesterday, this was thoroughly examined by the Senate Select Committee, by the Rob Silberman Committee, SILB as in boy, ERMAN Committee. Look it up. And then read the op-ed piece that Judge Silberman wrote in response to Ron Fournier of the Associated Press saying that George W. Bush, quote, lied us into the war, close quote. He was steamed. And he said, yes, there were intelligence failures. No question about that. But nobody lied. There was no intent to deceive. And so for George W. Bush to hear Donald Trump say it, it must have driven him crazy. And Donald Trump's way of apologizing is just to never say the same thing twice, but he never apologized for it, to my knowledge. And very likely did not pick up the telephone and call George W. Bush and say, I'm not going to go back on it publicly, but I got to tell you, I don't know that didn't happen. So I'm sure George W. Bush is steamed. That said, there's no reason at this point to give a speech like this. This is the kind of stuff Jimmy Carter does, kind of stuff Bill Clinton does, kind of stuff Obama will be doing over and over and over again. He's still a young man. We're going to be putting up with him for a long time. We don't need this. That said, Donald Trump will be able to handle it just fine. He'll move on just fine. Remember, George Herbert Walker Bush is the one who, in my opinion, did not sufficiently understand and appreciate Ronald Reagan's legacy. This guy raised taxes. Not only, of course, did Ronald Reagan lower taxes dramatically, he raised some of them, but lowered them far more than he raised them. George Herbert Walker Bush promised during that famous speech, read my lips, no new taxes, and then broke his pledge. And guess what? The left didn't say, well, we're not going to run a candidate against you since, after all, you've conceded on the major point. We wanted taxes raised, and you did so we're not going to run a candidate against you. We're down with that. What did James Carville say, who was Bill Clinton's campaign manager? Most famous broken promise in the history of American politics. And they pounded it with him. And they pounded and pounded. And apparently he still hasn't learned his lesson. And George W. Bush, well, he expanded the so-called CHIP program, got government further and further involved in all sorts of things. And don't forget, George Herbert Walker Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act. And on the 10th anniversary, President George W. Bush bragged about it. Another dramatic intrusion into government. And this is why you have people like Rand Paul who are so angry at people like Senator Lindsey Graham, calling them squishies or semi-status, because they are squishes and semi-status on so many issues.